Hey everyone, welcome to Your Enneagram Coach, the podcast. This is Beth McCord, your Enneagram Coach. And today we're diving into a unique and empowering topic on ADHD and the Enneagram. Now, ADHD can be a very complex journey impacting many individuals differently based on their Enneagram type and lots of other things about them. Well, today we're going to explore not just the negative influences, but also the positive aspects that ADHD can have on each person and each Enneagram type. And we're going to talk through how to use ADHD to not be a challenge, but actually to be a blessing. And joining me today are two amazing people who have exceptional gifts, both as certified ADHD coaches and as well certified Enneagram coaches. Now, they're going to bring a wealth of information and expertise on their own unique coaching approaches and their own wisdom and knowledge about how ADHD coaching can be used with Enneagram wisdom. For them, they just tailor their coaching sessions to really meet the needs of each client they work with. So, whether you personally are navigating ADHD yourself, you're supporting a loved one who has ADHD, or you're just curious about the intersection of the Enneagram and ADHD, well, this episode is definitely for you. We're here to bring to light this new approach of understanding how ADHD is impacted by each Enneagram type. But not only that, but how each person can grow in more understanding about themselves so they can grow. So, our two guests today is first and foremost my son, Nate McCord, a type 6, and Nate's journey is a unique one in that he grew up in the household of your Enneagram coach. Yes, so he's been around the Enneagram for a very long time. But not only that, his journey also is that he had ADHD for quite some time without any of us knowing it. And we'll get into that later in this episode. But he has really grown since being diagnosed with ADHD. And it has helped him to not just understand the struggles that he faced in school, but mainly the positive aspects that he brings to others because of this unique makeup of his mind. But also, we're going to talk to his ADHD coach, which is Leslie Robbins. Now, Leslie Robbins is an amazing ADHD coach who also loves to dive into all the nuances in helping her clients navigate the complexities of having ADHD. Now, she started this because guess what? Her sons also had ADHD. And as she was going through learning about it, she realized, I think there's something about this that actually is me. So she not only learned to help others, especially her kids, but also how to help herself. So she started her own coaching in 2018. Now, both of them have been certified through ADD Coaching Academy, which is called ACCA, and they have learned so many beneficial techniques and skills and insights and wisdom and how to help anyone with ADHD. So I can't wait for you guys to hear more of them. But the biggest thing I want you guys to understand about this approach, it is not that we're looking at ADHD as a problem. It's looking at ADHD for some of the negatives that it has and to grow through them, but also the positives, the superpowers that they give each of us when we recognize what those are. And I love their approach and their support to each person they encounter. Okay, so with all of that, let me welcome Nate and Leslie to the podcast. Hey guys.
Hey,
Hey.
how's it
Hey,
going?
good to see you guys. Well, this is going to be very helpful for so many people out there because so many more people are learning that they have ADHD and I'm actually one of those people who are in the process because Nate, you got it and you've said, usually one of your parents has it and we all know that I'm probably the one that has it. So I'm actually in the process as a 49-year-old maybe discovering that this is, something I've been wrestling with, but also a superpower of mine all these years. So, what I love for you guys to do first and foremost, because, our people, they don't really know you well. So, of course, I know you, Nate, very well, but I want everyone to get to know you. So, first, can you guys tell us a little bit about how you discovered the Enneagram and your type? But also then how did you discover you had ADHD? What was your age? What was going on? And also the benefits that you've experienced knowing not only your Enneagram type, but also that you have ADHD. And then combine that all with how does getting certified as a coach actually benefit you or having been coached with ADHD benefit you as well? So it's a lot, but I think it's going to be really important for people to really understand who you are and your background.
Well, I'm 52 and I have 3 boys, and my 2 older sons, they give me permission to share, do have ADHD, and they were diagnosed early on. And so I was always right there with them trying to help scaffold them and maybe do a little bit too much when they were younger because I didn't know what I was doing and how we were navigating it. And so there was a lot of growing and learning and mistakes that I made. And then by the time my middle son was in high school, I was talking with a friend and she said, you ought to be an ADHD coach. And I'm just because we were sharing information. I'm like, what even is that? I had no idea. And so I kind of Googled some coaching programs and found the training program that I landed on, which was ADCA, the ADD Coach Academy. I was probably about halfway through my coursework when I realized I probably had
That's
ADHD.
fascinating. Yeah.
So probably around 47 or so, I was like, okay, this is hitting home. There were
Uh-huh.
certain things that resonated with me. I was good in school. I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. I probably started delving in and learning about Enneagram about the same time I started doing some of this coaching, the ADHD coach training. So it's kind of simultaneous, interestingly enough. But I had that one wing, so I leaned into the perfectionistic piece, and so
Yeah.
I really wanted to do well. So I also chose my college courses based on interest. So
Mhm.
I set myself up for success without even realizing I was, doing what my ADD brain needed. But I think I kind of hit my wall probably when I started having kids. I started, feeling more overwhelmed. Um, trying to manage three boys and sports and school and helping them with
Mhm.
their ADHD, that type of thing. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit of that in a nutshell. I don't know.
Yeah, and then
I could
and
probably
then
say
you
more.
also became a certified Enneagram coach with us as well.
Yes,
So,
yes, I did.
which is one reason why I want you here because we're really marrying the 2
Yeah.
together because it's so beneficial. So, why did you decide to get certified as an Enneagram coach while also being a certified ADHD coach?
Well, the certification to me is important because I guess it's something that I need to for myself. I want to go through that training. I could have read all the books and for either ADHD or Enneagram, but I really wanted that knowledge that came from like such a strong, good source and from like you guys that you're so knowledgeable and have done so much work there. And it helped with my own confidence, I think. But when I started learning about my own number as a 9, I really realized I began to see things that I was completely unaware of, like that need for peace, and that's the motivator. And oftentimes with ADHD, I feel like we struggle with the motivation piece. So if we can hone in on that and we can bring in that piece and combine it with who we are and how we're wired and what we need to do to support it, then it's just that much more impactful. And I feel like you can go deeper faster when you understand someone's Enneagram type and then you understand their particular type of ADHD and how it's affecting them. And then
Yeah.
the blending is just that, I don't know, it's a double
It's like
blend.
supercharged.
Yeah, yeah, it gets me really excited.
Oh, man, I love it. Yeah, it's been just the things, Nate, that you've talked to me, in the living room and just the insights and stuff. It for those that have ADHD that are listening or loved ones that are listening, it just really hones in more specifically. It's more dialed in or tailored to them. Now, of course, each Enneagram type, is different, so to speak, right? Like we have some of the basic underlying core motivations, but we're all individuals. And same with ADHD. It's not like everyone has the exact same ADHD. So, which from my understanding has been really important to have individual coaching so that someone like you guys can really understand that person at hand and make sure that they're getting the right tools in their tool chest. Now, we'll get into that, but Nate, can you tell everyone when you started learning about the Enneagram, which of course that was way back in the
Mhm.
day. You probably don't even remember when you started hearing about the Enneagram, but tell people a little bit about your journey and how you found about your type, and then definitely the road to discovering that you had ADHD.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief because I have a history of going way too far back in time. But I I went back and forth between my type with you through elementary school. So went back and forth between a 1 and a 2 because I first and foremost cared so much about people, helping
Yes.
people, being with people, all of that stuff. But I was also, firstborn kid, you know, just wanted to kind of do the right thing and keep it orderly and follow the rules and stuff. And middle school, I start to experience a lot more challenges, especially academically, not in my performance, but more so I start noticing that I have a reading disability, just like my mom and my grandfather, my great grandfather did. But I think only my mom had gotten a diagnosis, but it wasn't very specific. It was just a
Mhm.
general, you have a reading disability. So we started to pick that up, but I wasn't getting as much help as I needed.
Mhm.
And also my ADHD wasn't being noticed. And that
Well,
blended
and
with
just to kind of jump in there just real quick, what's so interesting from a parenting perspective is you weren't hyperactive in the typical sense that people think of that word. Like when people hear ADHD, and I know you guys are gonna get into this later, you're just thinking of kids that are bouncing off the wall, and that was so not you. Now, there's other tendencies that go along with that
right,
word hyperactivity that you guys will talk about, but I think that's really important for parents out there to realize, look, we're not we're not just talking about finding a kid that is bouncing off the walls. It can manifest in so many other ways, and that's why you went undiagnosed for so long because that wasn't how you manifested. So, anyway, keep
right.
going. Middle school, your ADHD wasn't being noticed.
Yeah, and then that mixed with problems that had happened with my friends and teachers or just the world and kind of stuff, like, it was just very apparent very quick that I was a 6, and it was all about loyalty and justice and fairness and all of that stuff, and so, yeah, it was very clear starting in middle school that it was like, "Oh, Nate's a 6." And then it was about, what, a year, little over a year ago? Well, 2 years ago is when I got diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, and depression,
Yeah.
all within the span of about a month. I was in grad school, and I had gone pretty much since middle school through college of never reading a textbook because there was a lot of shame with it. It took me so much longer than everyone else, and I could get by with really great grades without doing it, and I just thought I was good at scraping by, and, um
When you look back now as an adult, you're like, "Huh, I guess I was pretty smart. I went through
yeah,
all of college, and got a 3.5 without
right,
cracking a book." I mean, that shows a lot of, not just intellectual smarts, but street smarts too of how to get
yeah,
by, which a lot of ADHDers, as I've heard, really have had to learn along the way. But then when you went to grad school, it all kinda caught up with you because you had to read more, and that
yeah,
really started making it more challenging.
it was, and the weird thing was, like, grad school was still pretty easy for me. I just had learned to think about things and to just learn things on my own. And but the problem was that I wanted to start paying more attention and I wanted to start reading through all the books
Mhm.
and just being fully attentive through grad school. And that's when my body was like physically shutting down. like
Mhm.
falling asleep 5 minutes into class, even though I got a full night's sleep and felt
Right.
super energetic beforehand. There were just things about my body that were starting to show even more so these symptoms. And so I got diagnosed with that. And it was really helpful, actually. It was sad because I was sad as to how long I'd gone without being diagnosed. But I was also thankful that there was that it was being named
Mhm.
and that I could start focusing on that. And then about a year ago is when I met Leslie, talking to her about becoming an Enneagram coach with us. And she was like, I'm actually already a life coach. I'm an ADHD coach. And I was like, what in the world is that?
Yeah, like, "Wait, what? This is a thing?"
I know.
And so pretty much what ADHD coaching is, we've got a few different kind of pillars of ADHD treatment. So you've got medicine, which is probably what most people think about first. And what medicine helps do is kind of level the playing field for the ADHD brain.
Mhm.
ADHD is really just a loss of blood flow to their frontal cortex, which affects the executive functioning skills for the person. And so that's why when you hear about ADHD traits, one, there's a gazillion of them, and they all sound like normal people problems.
Hmm.
But the thing is it's actually biological and physiological for the person, that it's actually their brain that is not able to really have these executive functioning skills like
Hmm.
neurotypical people might. And so, where ADHD coaches can come in is alongside either medication or diet and exercise, is education, and also help building structure
Hmm.
around their lives to help utilize their brain and brain wiring to what it's strengthened to do, and to also provide structure where it might be weak, you know? And so, for instance, most likely my grandfather, your dad, has
Mhm.
ADHD. And for the longest time, he carries index cards in his like shirt pocket.
Yeah,
And he will write, I mean, just everything he needs to remember in his entire life on those note cards.
he does, yeah.
And it's just a very classic story of an ADHDer that found something that actually helped them with their working memory.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of similar to what ADHD coaching is. And that's why it needs to be very tailor made. And so, some people talk about ADHD as self regulation disorder or dopamine deficiency disorder. And that's because, our brain is having trouble regulating dopamine, which is the chemical we need to focus on things. And so, really, what ADHD comes down to a lot of times, especially within coaching and self regulation for the ADHDer, is interest,
Mm.
because interest drives the creation of dopamine in our brain. And so, we work a lot from the base and structure of interest to help build onto things, of whether it's gamifying the things that are boring, doing the things that you love. If you notice, an ADHDer does not have trouble focusing on something that they love to do. In
That's
fact,
right.
they probably have a hard time focusing on everything else besides the thing that they love to do.
Isn't that called, like, hyperfocus?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and so that's kind of where ADHD coaching comes into place. And Leslie, if you have anything else to add on to that, feel free.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways I like to picture this is like, remember during COVID and we had these pictures of all of these cargo ships, with with all the, containers on them and everything, but they couldn't get them into port
Right.
and get the containers distributed to where they needed to go. That's
Yeah.
kind of what's happening in our brains.
Mm.
And it's biological and it's invisible. And so while sometimes we may look like we're doing well and we're able to hit the mark on a lot of things and focus and activation and follow through, it's situational, and there's a lot of
Mm.
situational variability, and other times we may not be able to do that, and we may be unaware as to why, and that's frustrating to us. But as children, and parents looking at their children and saying, oh, well, you were able to do this yesterday, why can't you
Mm.
do it today? And then that's perplexing. And so, and then, but you're exactly right, Nate, as far as that interest piece, it's so key to the ADD. I'll say ADD, but I'm ADHD is I'm kind of interchanging it, meaning the same thing. The
Right.
actual, oh, can I say something about that too? Is that the actual diagnosis is ADHD. And you mentioned that hyperactivity piece. There's three presentations of ADHD. There's the hyperactivity presentation, there is the inattentive presentation, and then there's the combined type of where it's a little bit of both.
Mm.
And where the hyperactivity falls into place with the inattentive is the cognitive hyperactivity. They may not be bouncing off the walls, but their brain isn't shutting down.
Mm.
They're getting this constant bombardment of thoughts, and they can't turn their brain off, and it could be a little overwhelming
Yeah.
for the inattentive, or it kind of nice because you get lost in your thoughts, and it's kind of a fun place to be sometimes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
which can correlate with some Enneagram types too.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's so fascinating about bringing these 2 together is you can kinda see and we're gonna get into that. You guys are gonna, like, talk through each of the 9 types and how ADHD can kinda manifest a little bit differently in each of the types or, I guess, heighten some aspects of their type, but also how it's a superpower, and I kinda can't wait till we get till type 9 because it has really been a superpower for me and one of my greatest weaknesses as well.
Mhm.
And I think, everyone's gonna see that, for themselves that have ADHD and some of the things that you're gonna highlight.
So one of the other things that is really good to kind of focus on a little bit, and we referenced it earlier, are the executive function skills. And Nate, you mentioned that they kind of reside in that prefrontal cortex, and what that encompasses are things like planning, prioritizing, organizing, sustained attention, activation, follow through, emotional and self regulation. It may even being able to be flexible and having flexibility and being able to navigate transitions. So it's that and more, but a lot of those particular skills can be learned, but they are also difficult for the ADDer to pick up on naturally because of the biological brain chemistry that's going on. And that's why it's unique brain wiring, because it's so
Mm,
specific to the individual.
wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting. S
Yeah, and I was in one of Adka's classes the other day, and they were, talking about how some people might struggle to and especially parents with their own kids might be struggling with, well, I was able to do this when I was their age, or kids of their age group are able to do this, why can't they? Or they can
Mm,
do it sometimes, but not all the time. And there is this really good story of an experiment that a guy named Jeff Copper, he would ask parents to put their dominant hand in a sling for like a few hours or the day or something like that, and to do everything with their non-dominant hand.
mm.
And this would give the parents experience from their child's perspective of trying to fight their dominant and unique brain wiring. And,
Okay,
it's
so
this.
so let me just kind of rephrase that. Let me see if this is where you're going with that. So the neurotypical, those that don't have ADHD parents, they're like, "Why is my kid like this?" Like, sometimes they're able to do these things, sometimes they're not. Like, why can't they just get their act together? And what you're saying is if you were to put your non-dominant hand in a sling, it feels so awkward to do things with that because the wiring in your mind is not used to using that less dominant hand, and so it takes so much more time and effort to figure out how to use that less dominant hand to do the things that you can do easily with your other hand. Is that what you're saying? And so this
Yeah,
gives parents or those that have loved ones that have ADHD a glimpse of, oh, that's why takes you so long to, let's say, develop a schedule or routines or stick with things because that's just not how you typically are hardwired as an ADHD. Is that kind of what you're saying, the metaphor?
Yeah. Yeah, like, when I was in high school, I had fractured my finger and I had to get a metal pin in it, and so I think it was 6 to 8 weeks or so
Mhm.
that I pretty much couldn't really use my right hand that much, and that's my dominant hand, and I remember that basketball season was coming, and so I practiced a lot with my left hand,
Yeah.
and to tie in this metaphor, sometimes I would hit shots with my left hand,
Mm.
but it was far less consistent. There's
Mhm.
Apple's little thumbs up thing. It was far less consistent, and I was not skilled enough to know the likelihood of me actually making the shot.
Huh.
And so I had to have this new perspective and expectation for how I was going to be able to use my left hand instead of my right, and knowing that I can still develop it to be a very strong hand and even to be nearly as strong as my dominant, but I
Mm.
had to go about it in a completely different way
Sure.
and kind of starting from that ground zero. And that's why coaches can be so helpful because they really can help you start from that ground zero, that new perspective, and build from the education of ADHD and understanding that person's specific brain wiring and specific interests.
Well, and I also imagine, at least from my own perspective, is I do so much better when I have someone in my corner that understands my
Yeah,
own struggles or issues and can guide me, just kinda it gives me that motivation or that interest versus I would imagine people with ADHD, they're typically being put in boxes or people are frustrated with them or why can't you do said thing, so you're constantly bumping up against individuals or people in your life that are frustrated with you versus having someone like a coach that's like, "Hey, here's what's going on. Here's ways that we can help you specifically learn." And your metaphor, shoot with your left hand. It's going to be hard, but over time we can get you there. Not that it will maybe always or be as easy as your right hand, but we can get you some really good help and get motivation. Is that kind of what coaching is doing? Is coming alongside and being that kind of that encouraging piece and that mirror to the individual?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And it's a part
Leslie,
no,
were
I
you?
was just gonna say too, it's a partnership, it's not us
Mm,
telling them our clients what to do. We work together.
yeah.
Oftentimes our clients will know exactly what works for them, but it takes some uncovering to and practice and experimentation to figure it out. Maybe we tweak it a little bit. And so there is a little bit of an experimentation, and we want to work from our strengths always,
Yeah.
always, always. And that's really key to how we coach our ADHD clients. And really, I have some clients that don't have ADHD, and I always start with strengths because it's so
Mm,
much easier to make forward progress when you're starting from that place versus trying to dig
yes.
yourself out of that
Well, and
hole with a weakness.
especially with people, ADHDers that lack motivation, and that's what they need is motivation, then yeah, it's
Mhm.
so much easier to be motivated when you're really good at something. So that makes
Yeah,
total sense.
And
yeah,
that's
Okay.
where the
yeah,
Enneagram can really help. And that's, kind of the job of any coach is we want to work ourselves out of a job,
Mm,
right?
mhm, yeah,
So the goal is self-regulation or being able to help manage yourself, whether it's external or internal. And so working from our strengths, we have to learn what our strengths are, remember them, build structure to make sure that those are kind of the shining star in a
mm,
sense, but also have spaces to help kind of, give almost like training wheels to the parts that are weak or, just guides and stuff.
got it.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah.
Well, as you know, I've been super excited about Nate, your certification in this. You're already a certified Enneagram coach, and then you added this, just like, well, Leslie, you got the
Mhm.
ADHD certification, and then you became an Enneagram coach. Um, and I've really been intrigued with all the things that Nate shares with me over time, especially when it comes to, well, what does ADHD kind of look like, or how could it potentially manifest in each of the 9 Enneagram types? So I'd like to dive into that. I would like to talk about, or have you guys talk about, what are some of the typical aspects that we might see that arise for each of the 9 types, maybe in ways that are difficult, maybe more challenging, but also how can some of these parts of them, these aspects of ADHD actually create a superpower for their said type? So, can we kind of go through each of the 9 types in that way?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Okay. So, who wants to start with type 1?
Nate, you want to go with that one?
Sure. And just to preface, we probably won't give specific action items for each type. So if you're expecting that, just, giving you a preface. And the reason that is kind of what we were talking earlier about the interest piece. For the interest piece, like it could be that for me, like I really love coffee and the experience of making like really intricate, like nuanced coffees. And and so that can be part of my morning routine that really starts to wake up my brain, give me that dopamine so that as I'm starting my work day, it's kind of like, okay, I've done something that I really love that really gets my brain going. And now I can kind of transition into work, helping my brain kind of get up to speed for the rest of the day. And so that's where it just would be tricky for us to give action
Sure.
items for each type that would for people that also have ADHD because it's more about just the day-to-day interests, not just kind of the core motivation stuff. And so, we wanted to give you guys some ways in which we could see ADHD impact types in both, you know, somewhat negative ways or heighten, with some of the traits, but also the positives. And so just to give that a preface.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
So,
and
type, oh, go ahead.
sorry. I'm sorry. I just
No,
had a
you're
thought.
fine.
So before we go in, Nate, before you start talking about the type ones, I wanted to just mention this before we got into all of the types, is that there's a specific trait that isn't measured by the DSM-5 when a diagnosis is being made for someone with ADHD. And the name of that trait is rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. And I think it feel like this can present itself in different ways for each number, but it's just this strong feeling. It's almost this painful, gut wrenching kind of knife in the heart feeling of like if you may have said something and you said it wrong, or
Mm,
or maybe it was a joke that didn't land, and but it's just or you did something that you felt like impacted somebody, and whether it's true or not, it could completely not even be true, but in your heart or your gut or your mind, you're thinking, oh, I've made a bad mistake.
mm.
And everybody can feel this way or have this RSD moment, but for someone with ADHD, it can happen a lot more frequently. So I wanted to touch on that one because that's something that not a lot of people know about if they're not familiar with ADHD.
Also,
Mhm.
I just wanted to touch on this and just see your guys' take on it is, Nate, I think you had mentioned that a lot of times people are diagnosed with depression when in fact it might just be that they are struggling with any kind of dopamine regulation because they're not getting the dopamine hits that maybe a normal or a neurotypical person has, and therefore the lack of motivation can feel and land on them as depression. And I know watching you, when you are on your medication, there is, like you said, it brings you up to that just the normal level field of feeling normal versus feeling that sense of depression because of the lack of motivation. Am I speaking correctly on this?
Yeah, I would, Nate, you speak for yourself, but there can also be coexisting conditions that come alongside with ADHD. Many times that's the case, and then, but it can definitely present like something else too. So Nate, you can elaborate more for your experience for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously we're not doctors or medical professionals, and so it's harder to speak on this per se. But yes, most people with ADHD, especially when like just in the coaching world, it has been a broad understanding that most people with ADHD come to coaching with very low self-esteem, maybe depression, maybe anxiety, and those symptoms can either be, actual psychological depression and anxiety and stuff, but it can also be symptoms of their ADHD.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is probably why it's so important to seek medical help through,
yes,
psychiatrist, maybe a psychologist who can rightfully understand the differences, which I know that you guys alluded to at the beginning, like, this is you guys are talking about coaching, but I do think it's important for us to realize that there's multiple layers happening here, and it's really important for us to go seek that medical aspect of it to understand the physiological body aspect and get that also worked out, while also having someone like you guys come along and, like you said, it's a partnership and walking alongside each of the 9 types that have ADHD to highlight where they're really strong, but also things that can trip them up. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I found that really interesting, and especially as I reflect on myself and some of the past, years as I'm trying to figure out if I have ADHD or not. I've had situations where I'm like, "Huh, I don't know if I was really depressed or if I lack such motivation that it felt that way." So I'm interested for myself to go get medical feedback on what's going on, so I think it's important for everyone that might be interested or is feeling that they have ADHD or do they not, to go seek that medical help so that they can know exactly, what's going on. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly. But Nate, I'll let you then jump into type 1, our principled reformer.
yeah. So for the type 1, some of the ADHD traits that are going to be super impacted, namely, kind of probably the most prominent one will be the perfectionism piece. And so for ADHDers, perfectionism can be just a very large struggle for them in trying to reach. And I think some of that comes from, the place, at least from in my experience, of it's hard for us to completely see either what reality is for others or for the general population because we are, classified as neurodivergent, that we see the world from this different perspective because of our brain wiring. And so a lot of times for ADHDers, we have these very lofty expectations of ourselves that we think we can always be this super huge version of ourselves. And it's not, it's different than confidence or just
Mhm.
courage in who we are, but it can be more so the unrealistic, unhelpful projection of what we should be. And so I think for the type 1, the perfectionism piece might be very heightened for type 1s. And on top of that, with some of the executive functioning skills, one thing ADHDers experience is what's called emotional flooding. And so it's this overwhelming sense of emotions and kind of the inability to control their emotions and to control and regulate their internal world on a regular basis. And so for the type 1, that perfectionist piece and the shame that comes with that and the inner critic can just really boil up and just really, um, really harp on the type 1 struggle with
Mm.
perfectionism.
Wow.
And then something that we also noted was there might be some struggle with procrastination and a sense of time blindness. So, time blindness is the struggle for ADHDers to have a consistent perspective of time, of how long things take, how much time they have to get ready, how much time do certain tasks take, all this kind of stuff. And so that shame and criticism can really build on whenever they fail to be on time, get something done on time, meet those expectations. And
Mm.
there was an article that explained that a lot of ADHDers experience perfectionism in that they are not perfectly prepared to do something. And
Yeah.
therefore, the procrastination piece can really be prominent. And so, we were curious and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as to if you're a type one, if you experience some of your perfectionism and procrastination as I'm not perfectly prepared to get started.
Mm.
It needs to be just perfect for me to feel like I can move into it and get started,
Mm.
or else I feel like it won't come out the way that I expect.
Mhm. Ooh, and
Um,
on that note too, it's also do I have is it the perfect time for me to start planning something?
Hmm. Yeah.
mm,
If I anticipate an interruption that's gonna throw me off because interruptions can really, make us, well, lose track of where we are, and if we know we can't hyper focus on what we want to do, if it's not the perfect time, we may avoid it or put it off or procrastinate until we think we have the perfect time, which then time blindness comes back into play because of our ability to feel time.
Yeah, that makes
mhm.
total sense. Wow.
Yeah, and then, some of the helpful aspects for the type one, we think that the hyper focus can be a huge strength. And,
Mhm.
there's somewhat of a difference between hyperfocus that's more so tunnel vision. So we zone everything else out, and it can actually be hurtful to, whether it's relationships or work or whatever it is. But the type ones can really get things done.
Mm.
And the beauty about the ADHD and their brain wiring is that when they love doing something, they will be very committed and they will just thrive in it.
Mm.
And so, alongside the dutifulness of the type one and the perfectionistic piece, the hyper focus can really help them get zoned in on the things that they're really passionate about. And also, the ADHD brain can be very creative and spontaneous and people oriented,
Mm.
and so it can really bring that type 1 to the healthy spaces of the 7 and the 4 and the 2
Yeah.
and so I think the ADHD brain wiring can actually really benefit, and you might experience type 1s with ADHD as very fun
Mm.
and a little abnormal from most ones where, they might be, heavily into that 7 path or heavily into that 4 path. And so those were
Yeah.
some of the ways in which we could see the ADHD brain wiring really be
Yeah.
helpful for the type
Oh, I think
1.
that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have something else to add?
Well, I was just thinking too, as you were saying that, Nate, is that it can help with the rigidity that sometimes ones might feel like they have the list and it has to be done this way. Being
Mm.
able to move into those healthy spaces of their other paths can really bring back or bring in flexibility
Hmm.
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome, which is great. Yeah, so and I think this is so wonderful because yes, we as we do with the Enneagram, it's a non-judgmental friend. We need to see the weaknesses of our types and the strengths, both sides. And then for those that have ADHD, how does ADHD compact or compound some things, but also how does it create a superpower? And so I love how you guys are highlighting both aspects for people to understand. Okay, so
Yeah.
Leslie, why don't we move into type two, the
Type
nurturing
2.
supporter?
Yeah. So one of the traits that we felt like could be really impactful for the type 2 is that impulsivity and reacting on the impulsivity of helping others and not maybe having some awareness of like, do they need our help? Are we overstepping boundaries? Are we time blind in this too, especially like with our own things that we have to get done as a two? and we put our needs aside for helping that impulsivity of helping others, and it can be
Yeah.
so reactionary sometimes. And then also that piece of possibly over giving or oversharing of information, which can come into play. And I feel like prioritizing and organization kind of come into play with some of that as well. And again, that
Mhm.
emotional regulation piece of being impacted by, oh well, they aren't appreciating what I'm doing for them. And then we can, there may be some resentment and some things that pop up, as well as
Sure.
overwhelm. And then going back to the boundary piece, are twos aware of
Mm.
setting up good boundaries for themselves because they struggle with identifying their needs? And are they aware of other people's boundaries and overstepping those with that impulsivity?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, they're gonna be naturally impulsive to help people that they see need help,
Mhm.
and that self-regulation of taking a step back and going, "Okay, is that my responsibility? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing right now?" And then again, like you said, the time blindness, they might be like, "Oh, I can just quickly do that," because I
Mhm.
know everything can feel urgent, or important, but when really maybe that isn't the most important thing that they should be doing, but it's hard when it feels motivating to get, let's say, like a hit of love or appreciation from someone after helping them. So I can see how that can really be effective or affecting to a type 2. What are some of
Yeah.
the benefits, like the superpowers that it has?
Well, they're so great. Well, okay, so this is one thing that's also really neat about ADHD is that we are really good at recognizing patterns. And I feel like each number has a different like gift in pattern recognition. And that is
Mhm.
especially true for the twos because they see it's intuitive. It's almost like this fast processing download where they're picking up on the needs of others. And I
So
think
true.
that's so beautiful. And that's where they're gifted. That's also where the interest piece is, and can really drive the two when they're in that healthy space as well. And they're so honest and authentic. And ADHDers love authenticity.
Hmm.
And it can help balance out, not that their intention is to be passive aggressive or manipulative, but it can help balance that out, and so that what they're trying to do is, especially when they're aware that, oh, maybe I need to pause and check my motivation. How authentic am I being? And I want my loved ones to know that this is coming from a good place.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think the biggest thing for the type 2s out there to know if that's true or not is, are there strings attached, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so am I truly giving out of an authentic place of my heart, out of true
Mhm.
love? And if so, the answer will be yes if I don't have string attached. I don't need something back from someone, appreciation or thankfulness. Now, of course, that would be kind of others to do that, but I don't need it because I'm giving it to myself. And so that's a great aha moment for the twos in that space.
That's a big piece too, because oftentimes we forget that we can give ourselves these things that we need.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, Nate. So why don't we jump into type 3, the admirable achiever?
Yeah. So for the type 3, one thing that might be very, very prominent for them with their ADHD brain wiring is the shame piece and the
Mm,
emotional regulation. So for the ADHDer, their brain is going to primarily be on the negativity bias.
mm,
Now, for a lot of these types, it might have some of the counterbalance, for a lot of the more optimistic types. And so that might be a real help. And for the type 3, with the, core weaknesses being the shame, they can really struggle with the emotional self-regulation because their brain is going to ruminate so much more on those defects
yeah.
and then kind of trigger them to try that much harder to achieve and to achieve.
Mhm.
They might also notice that they're much more focused on achieving for others because it's common that the ADHD brain is very people focused and people interest. And so, we've heard stories of you know, people with ADHD that are threes, and a lot of it is kind of the people closest in their life. And they're like,
Mm,
well, I need to do this because they think I should, or I need to
right.
be this because this person said I should. And then to know that they might be very aware of, how they're externally presenting themselves as threes are, and that might help them really counterbalance the self-awareness piece that the ADHDer lacks.
Hmm.
But I think the self-regulation and the emotional regulation piece will be exaggerated a little bit more.
Okay.
And then for the helpful aspects, it's going to really help that three be more authentic
Hmm.
and kind of have some of more of that counterbalance. They might, a lot of threes can be very lofty, big picture thinkers. And the ADHD brain is just going to like double down on that. And
Hmm.
all the kind of daydreaming and just creativity piece just will be heightened. And with the authenticity piece, it can really help them go to that six part,
Okay.
where it brings that healthy balance and it brings the kind of team oriented, people focused and yeah, and just brave part of themselves.
Hmm.
And then the other thing was we were saying about the patterns and pathways to success. And then some ways the 3 helps with the ADHD is how natural it is for 3s to set lists and to prioritize. And so that can be kind of a counterbalance as well. And
Yeah.
so some of these traits that we might be talking about today, you might say, "Well, I have ADHD and I am that type, but that doesn't exactly fit me." And that's just because of, our personality and our story and how we develop things, even in our weaknesses to be strengths because of what we needed. And then there will be things where you're like, oh, yeah, that's really tough. And so just understand that everyone's going to be different. So don't take these as like, this is exactly how it's going to be.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. So let's dive into type 4, the introspective individualist. So, Leslie, why don't you take that one on?
Okay, okay. Well, type fours, wow, they're such an amazing type. I will say creativity is big for ADHDers, but it really kind of shows here in the type fours. When Nate and I were talking, we were really kind of looking at this. The trait that would be impactful for the four would be that emotional and self-regulation piece. They aren't afraid to move into the melancholy, which can, if we're not careful, could lead into the negative. And because interesting things of interest can also be negative interest, so we have to really be aware of that
Mm,
in our with the negativity bias, because that can pull us into that rumination, and we can sit
okay.
and spiral on a lot of those things. And so that's something to really be cognizant of, and to recognize that when we've maybe been there too long, what do we need to do to get out of that space? And fours seem to be very comfortable in that place, so they can stay there maybe a little bit longer than other types might be. But then there's that time blindness. We may not
Mm.
know how long we've been,
Yeah.
thinking about those things. And they also may present more as inattentive in their
Mm,
heads, kind of thinking about some of these things, which can then impact the working memory and distraction, because maybe they're thinking about, whatever, whatever thoughts going through their head, they're kind of wrapped up with that, and then they're not in the present, so that they're not holding on to, like, if they're in class, they may not be holding on to what
yeah.
the instructor said and that type of thing, and they're easily distracted. And then there's the difficulty with organization, possibly some cognitive hyperactivity, procrastination, and following through, and flexibility here as well. And then boundaries may be difficult here, and sometimes it happens with folks with ADHD. They can, because of that awareness, and there's this belief that everybody has good intentions. Not, I mean, they might be taken advantage of.
Hmm.
Not that we all have that believes that everybody has good intentions. Some are more cynical than others, but that's something to also be mindful of. And then they may overcorrect and then set really harsh boundaries where it's kind of all or nothing. So because they don't want that to happen to them again, and that type of thing. So helpful aspects, I would say that moving it into some of that perfectionism piece of the one, but I like to look at this as appreciation of beauty and excellence. I mean, this is
Right.
where they can get really creative and really do some beautiful out of the box thinking and developing of things, whether it be art, music, whatever their interest is. And this is where the pattern recognition comes into play as well for that creativity. Nate, did I leave anything out on the fours? I feel like I kind of went a little fast.
No,
Yeah,
well, oh, go ahead, Nate.
I was just gonna say, I think, with the love that the ADHDer has for people, I
Mm,
think will present itself a lot in that 4 moving kind of to the 2, in that they will want to be very present with people
mm,
and very engaged and emotionally attuned, and able to sit with them in the difficult things. And the authenticity piece is gonna be very strong with
Mm,
that 4, as well as the 6, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
that's so true. And the intuition of the 4,
mm.
they're
I was going
Yeah.
to
so
say that.
yeah, they're so intuitive naturally, but then when you bring it with the ADHD aspect, plus, like you were saying, Nate, moving into that 2 space, they're not only able to understand themselves, but they're able to understand others and move into that space and really sit with people in difficult moments that not all the 9 types really wanna do. So, I think that can be true as well. All right, so Nate, why don't you jump into type 5, the analytical investigator?
Yeah. So for the type 5, the hyper focus of areas of interest might be even more so. And you might ask yourself, how is that possible for the 5? Um, well, essentially, it might really create a struggle of the tunnel visionness,
Mm,
you know? And also with the body battery of whether it's the social battery of dealing with people, but also, for the ADHDer, they can often have struggles with sleep because their brain tends to wake up more at night and they might stay up too late and not get enough sleep and have trouble waking up. And then their overall body battery is even less. Some of the activation and time blindness could be a real struggle. A lot of the social skills of self awareness and emotional awareness, kind of the reading of the room or monologuing about their interests can be a little bit more heightened. Some of the impulsivity of, you know, a lot of people with ADHD can really struggle with money
mm,
because of that impulsivity piece and kind of the unawareness of what their financials are. And sometimes that's not true because of, story and how you were raised. But for the 5, that could also be a big piece of, let's say, they're super into books, and it's like, just buy,
mhm,
buy, 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 buy. Like I just need all the things to be prepared. And then one of the other things was that perfectionistic piece
mm.
of being capable, being prepared, for whatever might come their way. That perfectionistic piece might really drive them forward. And it can do that in healthy ways, in that can be a very good strength of the 5, but it can also heighten that weakness for them of the never feeling like they are actually prepared, they actually know enough, they're actually capable enough.
Yeah.
And then some of the helpfulness, I actually have a friend who is a 5 and
Mm,
has ADHD, and man, he is so incredibly authentic and creative. He's a graphic designer, and so he's so patient with his work, and it's so intricate and creative, and so yeah, you can just see a lot of the traits for the 5 really heightened in that helpful space of he's so good at his craft. And the authenticity piece is really beautiful where he just welcomes the challenges and welcomes the agree to disagree or let's,
Mm.
talk things out piece. They can be very out of the box thinkers and very focused on what they love, like I said earlier, where even though it can be a weakness where they're tunnel visioned, it can also be a great strength in which they're really not distracted by things that might stray them from their overall goal. Um, I think part of the five that might have a helpful counterbalance is the working memory piece.
Hmm.
Mm.
And, of what they really care about, they really will have this system in their brain that is just so good at memory for what, they're really caring about. And then just the curiosity and love of learning that the ADHD brain brings can really heighten that for a five.
Hmm. That's so fascinating. I too have a 5 in my life, and I can see so many key aspects that have blessed him in being an ADHDer with his type 5 strength and just the he's a doctor and just the patients he's been able to help by being so hyper focused in his own research and care to understand his craft and the medicine that he actually uses to help his patients is really next to none. It's just remarkable. Okay, so Leslie, you're going to tackle type 6,
Oh,
which
I
is
don't know. That's Nate's domain. I don't mind if he
yeah.
goes again.
Okay, so Nate, why don't you take type 6, which is your domain, your type, and then Leslie, if you find anything he's missing, you can or forgot, you can jump in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that we really focused on was the catastrophizing
Mm,
and the negative bias. So for the six, their perfectionism kind of lies in avoiding all the problems, thinking of all the things that are going to happen so that everything will run smoothly so that you don't run into the problems.
mhm,
And so for the 6, and especially in my own experience of being a 6 with ADHD, it can really show up in that I have a really hard time of emotionally regulating and having that self-awareness of, wow, I'm that far into this catastrophizing mindset. Like I've been spiraling for the past hour and I wasn't realizing it.
mm,
Or some of my reactions can be from a very unrealistic assumption
mm,
of what might come and what problems might come. And so, what's interesting to me and kind of us thinking about this was I could easily see how this emotional flooding piece for the ADHD and a type 6 can show differently between the three subtypes, where the phobic 6 might be, more of the flight in the fight, flight, freeze.
mm,
The counterphobic is gonna move towards the fight, in their emotional flooding and reactiveness. And then I think for especially myself as a social 6, I result a lot in the freeze. And I kind of move to that 9 space of like, okay, I'll just be codependent, or okay, I'll just like stay here and like just take all of the heat in a sense. And so, yeah, so I think that rumination, emotional flooding, it might really heighten the emotional aspect for the 6 because they are the most emotional type within the thinking triad. But man, they're going to be some fast thinkers. They're going to be super authentic.
mhm,
Mom, you can attest to that in both strengths and weaknesses. Very people oriented, very passionate, brave, and courageous. I think will, just add on to those strengths and just be very curious and thoughtful and can really, the type 6 can help the ADHD be really attuned to people and can start to help with some of the self-awareness and social skills piece
mhm,
because the 6 is so committed to being a loyal friend and a loyal teammate or whatever.
yep.
Um, it is for you.
No, that's so true. Everything you just
Yeah,
said, so true.
yeah.
Well, Leslie, why don't you tackle type 7s,
Type
which
7.
yeah, the entertaining optimist.
Yes. So sevens, some ADHD traits that may be impactful for them would be impulsivity and distraction, especially on things that are interesting and fun. This might impact their ability to sustain focus. Like once they get into something that's fun and then they think of something else that's fun, maybe they jump around to a lot of different things, and following through. May be difficult, but not if it's fun and novel.
Mm,
Um, Again, that impulsivity piece may negatively impact spending habits and coping strategies and things like that. They're they're probably out of the 9 types, wouldn't you say, Nate, that are really seeking the dopamine? Like they're constantly looking for the more fun, the novelty, the interest. And this would be probably even more so true for sevens
mm.
than any other number. And there may be some positive illusory bias here too, where sevens might think that they're doing really well in something, or they're okay, they're managing it well because that the avoidance of the negative experiences or feelings, and that may cause them to not advocate for themselves. For example, like in a college experience, if they're like, I'm good, I'm doing good, I'm doing good, and then they're at the end of the semester and like, oh, it might be too late for help kind of thing.
Right.
And yeah, and let's see, I would difficulty pursuing and persevering on harder brain tasks. Like if it's an executive function skill that they struggle with, they're going to
Yeah.
avoid it. Yeah, and then there's the procrastination. And there may be some rumination too on like this there's this fantasy world and the world they want to live in, and they may ruminate on the actual world that they're in and focusing on the negative, not realizing that they're doing it. And so like a little push and pull here between some of that. And so self-regulation will be key, and emotional regulation too. And being giving themselves a space to acknowledge if there's something negative going on so they can move through it and get to the other side instead of just stuffing it down.
Mm,
Yeah. Healthy aspects, they're fun. They bring their creativity, their high energy, that hyperactive, impulsive, outgoing, spontaneous way about them. They're funny, outgoing. I think I said that. They can gamify things. And that's kind of a strategy. Nate alluded to that in the very beginning. Like if there's a task that's difficult, how can we make this fun? Well, there's all kinds of ways we can make it. Sevens can make things fun. And so
Yeah.
leaning into that core of who they are and bringing that to play, that pattern recognition, picking up on the positives that other people may overlook or not even think about. And so they can bring some really good perspective and balance to a situation. If it is a negative situation, like maybe at work or it's leaning that way, they can bring some optimism there. And then again, they can bring levity, and they're naturally people oriented, and they can
Yes.
hyper focus. Oh, one of the things we were talking about when Nate and I were going over this is that a seven may have difficulty planning and organizing and focusing, but if it's an adventure or like an event for a fundraising cause that means something to them, or a vacation, it may be the best ever
Yeah.
because they're going to hyper focus and they're going to be able to plan and organize all of it.
That's right. And one thing I was thinking as you were talking about if they have a mundane task or something that
Mm,
takes a lot of executive function that they're not good at, they might avoid it. Well, I
mm,
think if we flip that, the positive thing about that, because my dad's a 7 and we
mhm.
think he pretty much has ADHD, he is incredible at delegating. Now, sometimes this can
Ah.
be a little annoying because it's like, hey, stop delegating everything. That's not
But he's
fun.
learned that works for him.
But it does, like, if he doesn't really wanna do something or like something, or if he's not, let's say, necessarily great at it, he'll delegate it, and that has done him very well as a doctor, delegating things to his nurses and staff, and then he's very people-oriented, and so keeping it positive and fun, and so I think, again, all of the aspects that you guys are talking about that can be hindrances, like you're saying, can be flipped and be turned into positives as well because there's so many gifts that ADHD brings to each person, and then the 9 types. Okay, Nate, you take type 8 are passionate protectors.
yeah. So for the type 8, really the emotional regulation piece will be most likely a really big struggle for the 8, especially with the ADHD piece. And so, not only will they struggle to be open and transparent about their emotional state, but it might be hard for them to even be aware of that emotional state because the ADHDer often will struggle with the self-awareness and the emotional regulation piece. They might be good at self-awareness in terms of how they externally present, but when it comes to the internals, it might be more of a struggle.
Mm, yeah.
They
Well,
might
and
also
one thing I just
yeah,
kinda wanted to point out, because the 8s might be out there going, "What? I'm very authentic," which is true. You are very authentic. But there is a big difference, I believe, in being vulnerable and being transparent. And I think it's so transparency is, "I've calculated, if you try to harm me with this piece of information, I've calculated that I'm okay with it. Like, I'm just gonna put it out there." But true vulnerability and authenticity is more, I don't want someone to know this information because you might harm me or betray me with this information or control me with it. And therefore, I'm going to withhold it. And that's where I think they become unaware or not as authentic, meaning laying everything out there, because eights are very prideful in their quote unquote authenticity and realness. And so I just kind of want to make that caveat that yes, they will say things, but
right,
it's really at that point of transparency where they've calculated the risks, but
right,
true vulnerability can be a real struggle for the eight. So anyway, saying that as a
right.
side note, keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the social skills might show up in, what 8s often experience, which is that, people might think, "Oh, that person just doesn't like me," or, "Oh, like, they're kind of a snowplow, the
Mhm.
bulldozer." And so the ADHD brain might cause it to be more challenging to be self-aware of that aspect of, their life and how they interact with people. Dr. Hallowell, who has written several books that are very popular in the ADHD space and understanding the ADHD and their brain and all of that, commonly talks about the ADHD brain as if you're driving a Ferrari. And oftentimes, that emotional regulation and self awareness piece for the ADHD brain, because it's at a deficiency, can kind of be like having bicycle brakes on a Ferrari. And so, for the 8, that could be even more true of kind of the impulsivity, the authenticity, the bluntness, the I'm just gonna do it because like that's my gut instinct. It can really be like driving a Ferrari with
Mm,
bicycle brakes. And so, working on, you know, building structures so that those brakes are stronger to
mm,
stop and slow down that fast car. And we can also see how the 8 and the ADHD brain can really kind of combine to be very tunnel visioned and maybe more isolated, especially on the emotional side. But on a healthy side, I think the curiosity is really, really there. 8s just really, they do really want to know people because at the end of the day, like they do care. And some
yeah.
8s might really externally present as no I don't, or like I don't really want to be around people, but it's because of that hurt. But in reality they do really care and
Mhm.
they want to protect themselves and especially their inner circle.
Yeah, and also, if I can just jump in there, when I talk about eights, people are very familiar. I talk about them as a big diesel snowplow, not just a little Ford pickup truck, because they're designed to plow a path for others. And so when you
Yeah,
combine their curiosity from that 5 space and their desire and willingness to plow a path, or also known as helping people. So they are phenomenal. So if they get really locked into that space, it allows their heart to open up and to show their true kindness and love and sensitivity that's really there. I mean, they're some of the most sensitive on the Enneagram, but they usually kind of cover it up at times because of fear of being harmed and hurt and betrayed. So I think what you're saying, which is so true, the 8 is that if they're using that snowplow, that gifting that they have, the way that they've been designed to help others, to plow a path for others versus maybe plowing over people, it can be so beneficial for everyone, including themselves.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so,
Yeah.
so we can move on, just wrapping up a few of the things of, we think that the perseverance of an 8 could really benefit
Mhm.
them with their ADHD brain, where that might be more difficult. And just the bravery, the pattern recognition, the intuition of the 8, the people orientedness of the ADHD brain can really help them go to the healthy side of the 2 and the 9 and 7, all of that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it would heighten so many great aspects of the 8 and counterbalance it in some really beautiful ways.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Ooh, I thought of something too, Nate, too. That curiosity piece is huge and can counterbalance some of the judgment or like
Yeah.
their story and belief. And where there's curiosity, there can't be judgment. So
Mm.
Yeah.
so bringing that in to really balance, if they feel, if they're overusing judgment in a sense, that curiosity and love of learning can create this open-mindedness and
Yeah.
being open to different perspectives and that type of thing. And then can be really interesting too for the eighth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so good. All right,
Mhm.
Leslie, our type,
Okay.
type
Okay.
9. Let's
I'll
dive
do my
in.
best. But being unaware to
I'm
self
ready.
and
I'm
having
ready.
ADHD, inattentive and scatterbrained
Yeah.
are two that at the top of my list as far as traits that can be impactful. Prioritizing and people pleasing. The way
Mhm.
a lot of ADDers prioritize is not like in order, but like spreading it all out on the table and then picking out the thing that's interesting. And so that's definitely true for me. And especially if it has to do with the people in my life and or maybe I'm working with or volunteering with, and then, merging and not being aware of what it is that I want and that type of thing. Telling a tight story is very difficult for nines, or at least me, because we like to give all of the context. We feel like it's all important. And
Yes.
so that's a work in progress for me as well. And that can impact social skills and relationships. But sometimes that's also a need. Like we may have to say, hey, I just need to verbally process this. And then I'll be able to have more clarity. It's just how our brains work. There can be overwhelm and it can impact our ability to activate that RSD. I can speak for myself. I mean, if I feel like I said the wrong thing, oh my gosh, I could just feel like this wave of awfulness, like
Mm.
just kind of bathe over me. And once I learned about what rejection sensitive dysphoria RSD was, I was like, I was able to acknowledge, okay, that's what that was. It really wasn't as bad as I perceived it. And
Yeah.
I can move through it a lot faster. But that's that your presence matters. And if you don't feel like it matters, or if you feel like you said the wrong thing, it could really, I know it impacts me. And it can impact my, my ability to focus. And I could get kind of sideways and with that procrastination, perfection, going back to that one wing, uh, you know, having the right time, the perfect amount of time, it can impact that and avoidance too. We want to avoid the things that are
Yes.
difficult and or hard, or it might be a perceived conflict. It might be a conflict. Yeah, avoidance kind of can come up into play as well. Let's see. Feeling pressure to make a decision can cause us to freeze and be
Mhm.
stuck and overwhelm. So it's having space for us to be able to verbally process and not be put on the spot with an answer, even if it's as simple as, "What do you want for dinner?" I don't know, whatever you
Yeah.
want. Like, I don't care because I don't
Yeah.
want to make a decision. So decisions can be hard.
Yeah,
So
well, I think some of the words that you were saying when I think about myself as a 9, overwhelm is
mm,
definitely a constant feeling that I have, and now don't put me on the spot or I'll shut down.
I
yeah,
was
But But
I
one
was
thing I
gonna
was
say
also oh, sorry.
no, you go.
Well, one
You
thing
go
I
ahead.
was also thinking was earlier when you were saying prioritizing,
Mhm.
that is so hard for me because I've told Jeff this, is that I feel like there's a whiteboard in my brain and everything that has to get done or that's important or has some sort of thing that I need to do or think of is just splattered on this
Mhm.
whiteboard, kind of like a Jackson Pollock. And I'm looking at it going, okay, I don't know what to do first. Like, what's the most
Right.
important? And like you said, usually what's most important has to do with two things, either my motivation
Mhm.
or someone else is asking me to do it. And then it's like, oh, sure, I'll do that for you. I'll accommodate, like, and
Yeah.
so I can go usually down those two paths. But then what happens is then I'm behind on whatever else was truly important or urgent.
Mhm.
And then now I feel overwhelmed again. So those
It's
it
a
helps.
spiral.
Yeah, it's a spiral, and it helps me when I have people in my life that are really good or come alongside me and help
Mhm.
me to organize that, whiteboard in something that's a little bit more systematic. Now, sometimes when I get hyper focused, I am one of the best organizers, schedulers, detailers. I can knock it out of the park when I have plenty of space and time to really sit down and think it through. Now, I don't know if everyone's like that way. I know I bring in a lot of type 1 and 3 in that space.
Ooh, and maybe
But
6 to the healthy side
yeah,
of 6
right.
for
And
being prepared and planning, yeah.
yeah, and so and my 8, if it's plowing a path for my team, yeah, I can sit down and get it done. So, a lot of those aspects can come into play, but man, if that's not there, like I said, it is just this overwhelmed whiteboard, and it's just feels like chaos and too much, and then I just wanna shut down.
Yeah.
Or the
Oh.
emotional irregulation where I'm just like, So, anyway, just letting everyone know a little inside look into your Enneagram
Right.
coach's life, and my son's probably like, "Yep, I see that quite often."
Well, and there's this term that I'll use, and Nate's familiar with it too, is procrastivity. And so I think this is something that threes can do, and I think I know I do it where it's like I'm procrastinating, but I'm also doing something. So it's that doing repressed, doing dominant thing that nines have,
Yes,
and it
yes.
may be not the thing that I need to be doing, but I'm doing that thing, and it could be for the avoidance, that type of thing too. So
So
procrastivity is a
true.
real thing as well. But from the healthy side,
Yeah.
the other overwhelm thing I wanted to touch on too is because we see all these perspectives, and I think
Mhm.
that's another reason why making decisions can be hard and people pleasing can be easy, is because we just that's our pattern recognition.
Right.
Like we see those perspectives, and it's it's intuitive for us, which is great. It's a gift. And that's also
Yeah.
can take us to the healthy aspects, and where we can lean into our ADHD, and it can support our social skills because we are picking up on those things. And we have great perspective and metacognition where we can see a big picture, especially moving into that three space too and achieving. And we have great working memory for the people we care about, and we have consideration, like deep consideration for others, but we have to remember to have consideration for ourselves, and make sure we aren't overlooking ourselves,
Yeah.
as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah, yeah. And
I
I think
was
we're less likely to be impulsive.
Yeah.
yeah.
I would like to know what other nines think on that.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, I
true.
think it's maybe more so, like, where the impulsivity shows
Yeah.
up.
That's what
So
I
it
was
could
gonna
be
say. I can
Mm,
be
more
super
yeah,
impulsive
im
to people please or
yeah.
impulsive to
that's true.
run to the slothfulness kind of
Oh,
stuff.
I'm super impulsive when I know what other people want or what's gonna make them happy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm, like,
Yeah,
jumping all over that, like, "Oh, that's easy, I can do that. Yeah, sure, no problem." But then when it's like, "Well, what is your hobby, Beth?" I'm like,
I don't know.
I don't know. What do you want my hobby to be?"
I had that
Yeah.
So
conversation with my husband a long time ago. He's like, "You need a hobby." I'm like, "Oh, no, that's
I know.
pressure." Like, I gotta
Yeah.
find like, I couldn't even it was horrible. He's looking at me because he's an 8 and he has a bajillion hobbies.
Right.
And I'm like, "I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna sit here and do nothing."
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the other night, Mom, you were like, "Man, I need a hobby. What should I do for a hobby?" And I was like, "You
My
spent
hobby
how"
is my hobby has been the Enneagram, and it's like, okay, I need something outside of the Enneagram because that's gonna burn me out, if I am just constantly working on the business and the Enneagram. So, yes, I said that, and then you
But
were you were like,
yeah, and I was like, "You spend hours on AI software just tinkering around," and yeah, sometimes it's for work, but you just really enjoy it and you love learning about it, and it really
It,
helps you in your thinking for your ADHD as well.
"It
And you're like,
does."
and it's
"Oh,
novel
yeah,
too. It's a little new, something
yeah,
Right.
out there and supportive.
It is, and it really helps kinda bring to the forefront for me what I'm interested in, like,
Mm,
all 'cause in growing up with a reading disability, I'm not the greatest at writing and grammar and all that stuff, so I can kind of at nines, as you were saying with our communication style, we kinda meander in our talk style, and
mhm.
so we can kinda say a little too much, and so I'll write something in there, and I'll ask it to rewrite it in whatever like tone that I want it to write in, but like, can you rewrite this, email or this note and like, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was, trying to say, but
Yeah,
I said it in 100 words when you just said it in 30, or something.
exactly.
It is like,
Yeah.
oh, that's how someone could have said it in 30 words instead. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it is really intriguing, but I do find it, like you said, novel, and it also is beneficial for me, and it's helpful, and I'm learning new skills, and so, yeah, it is kinda and when he said that, because people will say, "Oh, we'll pick up knitting or this," and I'm like, "I know people really love those things, but that's just not my thing," and I couldn't think of anything that I would be interested in. Once he said that, he's like, "But mom, you do this said thing," I'm like, "Yeah,
Mhm.
you're right." Like, I was like, "You mean I could do that, like, just for fun?"
For
You know?
fun? That would be great. I
For myself? Yeah, so
Right.
it's interesting how us nines, we just are really blind to our
Mhm.
own selves because we've been trained since childhood to focus on others, and
Yeah.
what does that
What does that
even
look
mean
like? Yeah.
to focus on ourselves? And therefore I can be motivated so if we're talking ADHD, I can be
Mhm.
motivated when someone else asks me to do something and I'm accommodating to other people, that gets me very motivated quickly, but that doesn't mean it's actually good for
yeah,
me, and so but then when someone says, "Well, what is good or right for you, Beth?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, please don't ask me that question." But that's where I need to grow, that's what I need to focus in on, one as a 9, but then also as a person who
Yeah.
has ADHD, most likely. We'll find out
Mhm.
here soon. And
Yeah.
and that's a
And
challenge.
externalizing that too, like, if it's for nines
Yeah,
too, like, what would you say not what how would you, have self-care for as a 9? Well, that may be, again, perfect or pressure and, it's difficult to come up with something, but what would you tell a friend?
exactly. When Jeff does that, I'm like, "Oh, well, da 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 da."
Exactly, so if we can, have that space of what would I tell a friend who needs XYZ or wants XYZ, then I can write it out or whatever that modality is for me, and then I can flip it back to myself,
Right. Yeah,
and
that's such a great tool
I
for
don't know.
9.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's coaching yourself, and I think any great coach, whether it's just an Enneagram coach or an ADHD coach or a combined, like you guys
Mhm.
who do both, that is what we're trying to do is we're helping others to learn to coach themselves through the things that they
Exactly.
struggle with. And so, yeah, so if a 9 is so good at listening to others and being receptive to others and then giving them direction and advice and wisdom, then why not use that for ourselves as well and turn it
Yeah,
around? I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
guys, this has been
move to 8 and
so
get
yeah,
spontaneous and zesty and,
yeah, yeah,
brave, where we may not
exactly.
feel brave, yeah, so
Well, guys, this has been so fun, and I know there are so many people with light bulbs going off and insights, whether it's themselves or the loved ones that they have in their life, and they can see how having a certified ADHD coach who's also certified in the Enneagram could be really beneficial, again, for them or their loved one. And so, with that, can you guys tell people where they can find you and your services, information that they can get in touch with you?
yeah. Nate, you wanna go? And I'll follow
Sure.
you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, natemccordcoaching.com. Both Leslie and I are kind of primarily focusing on the family and on kids. For me, I don't necessarily have a specific age range, um, but I've done college ministry before, and so that, probably is as of now, maybe more of where, I might have more experience in. But yeah, we just really love helping to work with the parents and their kid to understand their unique brain wiring, realize that the kid is starting from a position of using their non-dominant hand and starting from that new perspective, building the structure. And so if you go to my website, namemccordcoaching.com, you can just click the learn more link and it will take you to my scheduling, and you can sign up for a free 30-minute discovery call where we just talk about how I can really serve you and help really make it customizable to what your needs and your family's needs are.
Wow. Thanks,
Yes.
Nate.
Yeah.
And Leslie, what
Yeah,
about you?
my website is leslierobinscoaching.com. And I also have a tab there where you can book a discovery call or exploration call as well, and that's free. We offer that, and love to hear from you and hear your story. I love working with high schoolers, college students. Really love working with parents and really help educating and helping them understand it, and then coaching them to come alongside their child or their student. And I love working with moms with ADHD too. That's kind of become not a new passion, but I'm really recognizing that's where a space I love to be in as well. And I'm doing some fun things too right now where I'm working with students and discovering their character strengths. And it's a tool that I use, and it's a launch pad from working with strengths. And so
Mhm.
some of my clients in this area do not have ADHD, and some do, and it doesn't matter. But if there's a diagnosis or not, but that has been really fulfilling to me because it fills my cup because they're discovering who they are. And I especially love doing this with high school students launching into college, because who knows who they are when before they go. So bringing the Enneagram and bringing the character strengths, and then if there is some ADHD there, helping them understand that too is just very fulfilling, and I love it so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good.
Please don't feel the need to have a diagnosis
Mm-mm.
before you meet with us. It's okay.
Yeah,
We'd still love to work with you from where you're
Yeah.
at.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Meeting
No,
you where you are, whether you have traits or a diagnosis, we can do it.
yeah.
Yes.
Which is great. And that's what's so beautiful because you guys can take them through a wide spectrum of skill sets that you guys have learned through whether it's Enneagram coaching, ADHD coaching, or the combination of both, which everyone, could really benefit from. So guys, you've been so amazing. I've learned so much, well, today, but just so much in general from what you guys are learning. And I just feel like it is so needed in our community because a lot of people are learning they have ADHD or they have tendencies towards it. And coaching is really where it's at. To have someone come alongside you and support you is so beneficial. So Nate at natemccordcoaching.com and Leslie Robbins coaching.com. Thank you so much for being with
Mhm.
us today.
Yes, and
Thanks.
that's Robbins with two B's. Sometimes that's confusing.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you. I enjoyed it
okay.
so much.
Thank you. Well, I hope you guys found that conversation very fascinating because I know I did. And I hope that if you or a loved one has ADHD, that you can see that there's not only great hope, but that they've got some superpowers there. And there's hope through coaching that are specifically designed for them. And so, again, if you're interested in grabbing a coach that's certified in both ADHD and the Enneagram, then you can go to natemccordcoaching.com or Leslie Robbins coaching.com. And that's with two B's and her name, Robbins. And both of them can really facilitate and help you or your loved ones to grow. But remember, the Enneagram reveals your need for Jesus, not your need to work harder. It's the gospel that transforms us. I'll see you guys on the next episode.